you.
Okay.
You're welcome. I will put myself on mute.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. A brief introduction to me. I've spent 25 years in e-commerce. That's been PLC retail, PE-backed brands, founder-led businesses, and I spent half a decade in the Gulf running D2C launches for premium brands. Most recently, as Paul's mentioned, I was Global Ecommerce Director at Barbour, where my remit covered D2C and digital transformation across 5 markets. Why does that range matter today? Well, I've watched the same structural decisions get made and made badly in 4 completely different commercial contexts. What fails under a PE pressure also fails under founder fatigue. What works in a Manchester warehouse also works in a Dubai boardroom. The pattern isn't sector specific, it's not size specific, it's not even geography specific. Now, I know most of you spent the morning listening to 6 brilliant brand and operator stories, each one specific, each one with scars. I'm going to tell you a 7th. What I want to do is show you the pattern underneath all of them, including the ones that you've heard today. Every growth story has 3 or 4 structural decisions buried inside it. And whether those decisions were made deliberately or by default is what actually determined the outcome. Nothing I tell you today is going to be theoretical. Every decision I'm going to walk you through, I've either made, watched someone else made, or I've picked up the pieces afterwards. Far too many times it's been picking up the pieces. Some of the pieces were mine, but we'll come to that. Tactics are not a strategy. Tactics are what you do after the strategy is wrong. There's roughly 4,000 articles published every week about e-commerce growth hacks. Most are about tactics. I'm sure you've all seen headlines like 7 email sequence that doubled my retention, or the Google Ads tweak that dropped our CAC by 40%. Most of those are fine in isolation. Most of them are even true. But tactics are downstream of decisions, and the decisions are where businesses win or lose. Here's the thing. You can run a perfect email sequence on top of a broken channel architecture, and all you've done is optimize the wrong thing faster. Today, I'm going to walk you through 4 structural decisions. After each one, you'll know whether your business is making the decision deliberately or by default. That's the whole job of the next 20 minutes. Most e-commerce failures are not technology failures. They are readiness failures. 25 years I've been doing this. PLC retail, PE-backed brands, founder-led businesses, US, Europe, UK, the Gulf. Same pattern. Every sector, every size, every market. The businesses that struggle are almost never struggling because of the technology. They are struggling because they invested in growth before securing the foundations that make growth sustainable. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of the time, the people who made those decisions knew it. They made those decisions under pressure, wearing 6 hats at the end of a long week, with a board asking them for a Q4 number and a head of ops asking them for a stock position, and an ad account that needed reauthorization, all before Friday. That's not a character flaw. That is what founder-led scaling looks like. I've been in those rooms and I've made some of those calls. My job today is not to tell you to slow down. It's to give you the language to recognize which decisions actually need that extra 20 minutes of thought, which ones don't. These aren't the decisions that mattered. A quick note before we dive into this. I'm not saying that platform doesn't matter. I've seen businesses on Shopify fail. I've seen businesses on Magento 1 scale to 8 figures. I've seen brands spend 50,000 a month or more on Google Ads and still have structural margin problems that no ROAS improvement is ever going to solve. A real example, one brand I spent 2 years working with, 2 years working with them, had been optimizing their checkout throughout that entire 2 year period. They were running dozens of A/B tests on the checkout, hero image variations, trust signal placements, guest checkout flows, all of it rigorous and all of it measured. None of that moved their contribution margin, not one iota, because the acquisition channel mix was structurally wrong and the checkout wasn't the constraint. The decisions I'm going to walk you through sit upstream of all of this. Get them right, and most tactical decisions become forgiving. If you get them wrong, nothing downstream is going to save you. 4 decisions, each one of them structural. Here we go. Channel architecture is a strategic choice. The most common mistake I see in scaling brands is treating channels as an add-on rather than as an architecture. Business runs primarily D2C. Then it lists on Amazon because that's extra revenue. And who doesn't want the extra revenue? And then you start to field wholesale inquiries. And each one of those feels like a win at the time. But none of them are a strategic decision that's made deliberately. Quick story, a premium brand I work with has grown to around 8 million in direct to consumer. Strong margin, good brand, loyal customer base. And then a marketplace opportunity dropped in their lap with the promise of doubling the top line revenue in 12 months. And they leapt at it. Who wouldn't? The top line doubled. Fantastic. But their contribution margin collapsed. Customer data that had been driving their retention engine stopped growing as every new customer now belonged to the marketplace, not to them. 18 months later, they were running a bigger business with thinner margins and a weaker data moat. The decision to take the marketplace was never framed as we are changing our business model. It was framed as we are adding a channel. That's the trap. So let me frame it properly. D2C gives you margin and first-party customer data, the most valuable asset you own because it compounds. Marketplace gives you volume and it gives you discovery, but at the cost of both margin and data. The algorithm owns the customer, not you. Wholesale gives you capital efficiency, but you seeded the customer relationship entirely. Now, none of those are wrong. Each one is legitimate. But running all 3 with equal priority and no strategic intent means you are optimizing for none of them. D2C, marketplace, and wholesale are 3 business models pretending to be 3 channels. You can run all 3, but you can only run them well if you've chosen which one you are leading with. That's decision 1. Number 2, the US is not a bigger UK. You need to decide your entry model before you spend a single dollar on US acquisition. Now, a quick caveat for the room. I know that we have people joining us from the US, and I know that we have people who won't be intending to go to the US tomorrow. That's fine. I'm using the US here because it's the clearest, most brutal example of a structural decision that gets made by default. But the lesson really is applicable to any market entry decision, whether that's a new sales channel, a major platform bet, or any other international market. Now, I've watched brands enter the US with great enthusiasm. We've got strong UK numbers, we've got a clean product market fit story, and they hit a wall that they don't see coming. Not because the product's wrong, but because they treated the US as a distribution decision rather than a market entry decision. They assumed that the UK economics would travel. They don't. Look at those 4 lines. Brand awareness. In the UK, brands know. In the US, it's 0. You're building a whole brand from scratch while also selling product. I've worked with brands who have 80% brand awareness in the UK. And after 18 months trading in the US, there's still single digit brand awareness. It's not as simple as picking and shifting. Delivery expectations. Delivery expectations in the US are tighter than the UK. 2-day isn't a premium, it's the floor. That means your fulfillment partner choice is a commercial decision, not an ops decision. The returns profile. 30 to 40% returns isn't unusual in the US, but it's roughly double what most UK brands plan for. And then your customer acquisition. It's more competitive. You're going to be facing higher CPMs. Now, every one of those differences compound. And a business that worked at 25% blended margin in the UK, it loses money on every US order if it takes the first 12 months. That's the moment I've seen time and again where founders are sitting with the management accounts in month 8, looking at their US P&L and realizing that their UK assumptions don't hold. That moment is expensive. The only thing that's more expensive is the one that comes after. 3 credible US entry models. So if the US is not a bigger UK, what are the viable models? There's 3, each one's legitimate, and each one is structurally different. The right model is whichever one you can sustain commercially for 18 to 24 months before it becomes profitable, not the one you can afford to launch. The one you can afford to keep going after the first quarter didn't deliver what the investor deck promised. Direct to the US, it's high control, but it's capital intensive. US-based fulfillment, localized checkout, tax calculations, compliance, US customer service with a US time zone coverage. The brands that work well with this model typically have committed up to 24 months of runway and treat the US P&L as a separate entity to the UK P&L from day one. Marketplace first. That gets you in front of 200 million Prime members without building the infrastructure. It's a lower barrier to entry. It's a lower risk of capital destruction, but you will not own the customer. Your brand equity builds in Amazon's sandbox rather than your own, and the margin erosion is structural. It's fine as a proving ground, but it's dangerous as a permanent home. A partner or wholesale entry is capital light. You can find a US distributor, they carry the infrastructure risk, you ship them the inventory, but you cede execution at the most critical moment. And one bad season with a major retailer can delist you across the chain. The most expensive decision I've seen is the one made in month 3, when you're running out of runway and you need to pivot from direct to marketplace in a panic. That pivot costs you margin, data, and 6 months of brand positioning. The takeaway from this is you need to decide the model before you build the operation, not after. This is the conversation that nobody wants to have. So I'm going to have it now when it costs nothing, rather than in 18 months when it costs a lot. In plain English, for blended contribution margin, this is what you keep out of every order after product, fulfillment, acquisition and returns, before your overheads, before salary, before tax. Now, I'm sure most of you know this number to within a couple of points. If you don't, that's a signal. It means your P&L is not telling you what the business is actually doing at a unit level. If you're 30% or above, the US will stretch you, but it won't break you. If you're at 20 or below, the US is going to make your margin problem much worse before it makes it better. 30% threshold isn't magic, it's the floor, which the US cost structure becomes absorbable rather than fatal. How do you know if you've got this problem? Well, first, if you run a promotion and your accounts team cannot tell you whether the promotion made money or lost money because your cost to serve is not tracked by channel, that's a signal. Second, if you add a new acquisition channel and your CAC goes up, but you can't isolate which channel is dragging the blended number down, you've got a problem. Third, if your returns rate has moved 3 or more points in the last year and nobody has modeled what that has done to the unit economics, you've got a problem. If you have any of those three, the US isn't where you should be spending your next pound. The US is where you should be looking at once your UK P&L tells you the truth on a Monday morning. The brands that I've worked with and that I've seen successfully expand to the US sorted their margin architecture in the UK first. They were pricing with purpose, not hope. Cost to serve was understood by channel. The returns were managed as a commercial lever, not a service cost. Run that test before you do anything else. Last of the 4 decisions, measurement. I've sat in more data reviews than I care to remember or could possibly count, where the room spends 90 minutes discussing what the numbers were and 0 minutes discussing what to do about them. That's a measurement architecture failure, and it almost always is the symptom of reporting that was inherited rather than designed. Revenue and sessions tell you what happened. It's useful, it's terrible for decisions. Contribution margin by channel, repeat purchase rate by cohort, and cost to acquire by channel tell you what's happening to the business. They tell you where to invest, where to pull back, and what to leave alone. And this is the single most useful thing I can give you today. For every metric on your dashboard, ask one question. If this number moved tomorrow, what decision would I make? If you can't name one, that metric doesn't belong on the dashboard. It belongs in an annual report. I'll give you an example. A brand I reviewed last year had a Monday morning dashboard with 34 metrics on it. Founder looked at it every Monday. It was his Bible for 2 years. And when I asked him which metric he actually acted on, he thought about it and said, none really. I just want to know if we're growing. It's not measurement, it's just reassurance. The dashboard that he now works with has 7 metrics on it. Contribution margin by channel, CAC by channel, repeat purchase rate for the 90-day cohort, stock cover by category, gross profit rate versus target, returns rate versus plan, and one leading indicator that he chose himself. Every one of them is attached to a specific decision he would make if they moved. Now, for anyone who's heading to the US or a new market, the metric I put above everything else in year 1 is contribution margin per order by market. Not revenue, not ROAS, because that's the number that tells you whether that model is structurally viable or whether you are buying revenue at a loss and calling it an investment. So, the decisions that matter share one quality. 4 decisions: channel architecture, market entry, margin architecture, and measurement. Now, the pattern. Looking across every business I've worked with or studied, PE-backed portfolios, PLCs, startup, founder-led brands at every stage, the pattern holds. Deliberate decisions made early created commercial momentum. Default decisions made late created structural problems. The amber quadrant at the top right of your screen, deliberate and early. This is where the businesses that you've heard from today live. This is the quadrant where sustainable scaling happens. Let me tell you about the bottom left, structural failure. I sat in a room where a platform replatforming decision, a genuinely strategic multi-year commitment, was being made because the existing platform had broken one too many times. The trigger was tactical. An outage during a peak trading window. A board member who'd seen enough, and a vendor proposal that'd been sitting in a drawer for 18 months gathering dust. The decision itself was structural. It would determine how the business transacted, scaled, and integrated for the next 5 to 7 years. But no one in the room stepped back and said, hold on, this isn't a platform replacement, this is a business model reset. And the team went forward with the same assumptions and the same scope they had built into the old platform. About 6 months into the build, we discovered that the new platform couldn't support one of our core commercial capabilities, something that we'd built on the old stack and had been treated as a given on the new one. It wasn't malicious, it wasn't incompetent, but it was a structural decision that was made tactically at pace by people who were doing the best with what they had. Now, that decision cost the business mid 7 figures to put right and swallowed about 18 months of development roadmap. That's bottom left. That was a default late decision. That's the most expensive category on this slide. The businesses that move out of it do so because one person in the room stopped and asked, is this actually the decision we're making? So this slide says before you go to the US, but as I've mentioned, these 3 questions aren't really about the US. They're a test for any structural decision. Substitute the US for new platform, new channel, new acquisition strategy, or new market. The questions hold. Question 1, which entry model can we sustain for 24 months? Not 6, not 12, 24. And that's the capital question. It's the one that most founders answer too optimistically because the excitement's louder than the arithmetic. If you're making that kind of decision, the question is, can you sustain the run rate of a new platform, new market for 2 years, even if the efficiency gains take longer than promised or expected? If you're adding a channel, can you afford to underfeed the core channel for 2 years while this one ramps? Question 2, does our margin architecture support the new cost structure? Every structural decision changes your cost base. A new market like the US adds fulfillment, returns, and cost of acquisition. A new platform adds licensing, agency fees, and the cost while your team is learning a new stack. A new channel adds commission, brand cost, and data dilution. Same principle each time. If you haven't modeled that new cost base honestly, you're about to find out what you do not know the hard way. Question 3. What does success look like in month 18 specifically? Not bigger or profitable or a meaningful contribution, specifically. What's the revenue number? What's the contribution margin rate? What's the customer count? What's the payback window? If you can't state a specific commercial outcome in one sentence, you're not ready to make that decision yet. You're still in the exploration phase. And that's fine. That's a good place to be, as long as you don't commit capital until you can answer that question. For the room today, pick any structural decision you're currently wrestling with. Run it through those 3 questions before you leave the session. If the answers are murky, you've just identified your next week of work. I started by saying that you spent the morning listening to 6 brilliant stories and that I was going to show you the pattern underneath them. Here's the pattern in one sentence. Every business that scales well had a moment where someone said, we've been treating this as default and it's time to treat it as a decision. That's the whole talk. The stories you've heard today are all about different businesses, different markets, different growth trajectories. But inside every one of those stories is the same moment, the moment where what had been happening by default became a deliberate choice. Sometimes it was a platform decision, sometimes a channel decision, sometimes a margin call that a founder had been avoiding for months. The specifics varies, the structure doesn't. So pick one. Pick one structural decision your business has been making by default. Channel architecture, market entry, margin architecture, measurement. Pick one this week and make it deliberately. Not perfectly, not fully, just deliberately. Write down that decision, write down what you're choosing and what you're choosing not to do, and share it with someone. That single shift from default to deliberate is worth more than any tactic I could have given you in the last 20-something minutes. If you want to run a full diagnostic across all 7 failure clusters, that's my framework, Fit to Trade. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can see the Fit to Trade model there. It's a self-assessment, takes about 20 minutes and tells you exactly where the structural gaps are before they become expensive. Thank you everyone for your attention, and I think we might have a couple of minutes open for questions. Thanks, Paul.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. The first question that I have, we're working right now with one of the clients, and they're using a Global solution. There's other companies that help you to go internationally. What's your, in a short answer, what's your opinion on those companies? If a smaller brand, should I go this way, or?
It's about fit for purpose, Paul. So they can be a useful tool to rapidly enter markets and scale and test. Wherever you have a clearly defined market and you've made those deliberate decisions, I believe it's better to go yourself. Where you have those third-party opportunities to enter markets and hand over complexity, as long as all of your metrics and your commercial stack up, they can be a useful tool. Where I've seen them most effectively deployed is where you have the agreement with that provider for a duration of time, but not market specificity. So you can test markets. If the market's proved to work, you go in yourself. If it's not, you switch to another market and you use it as a cascading mechanism.
Thank you very much for your insights for this session.